Oh, can someone hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Mr. Prince? You can hear me, sir? Looks like you're
Unmute.
muted. There you are. You can
Okay,
hear
can
me
you
all
hear me
right, sir?
now?
Yes, I can. All right,
Okay.
I'll just sit tight
I
till we're
can't hear
ready.
you. I can't hear you. But hold on one second. Let me
I can hear you just fine. You still can't hear me? Can anyone hear me? Can anyone hear me? Can you hear me, Mr. Prince? Can you hear me?
The year was 1916, when a 29-year-old Jamaican-born man with a love for Africa, pride in African people, and a vision of Pan-African unity,
Neil, can you hear me?
love,
Hi, Alex.
and strength, arrived on America's eastern shores, armed with an impenetrable sense of purpose, duty, and
I see
destiny.
Richard's muted.
Just 54 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, 51 years after the end of the Civil War, with the vast majority of blacks in America still mentally enslaved, experiencing widespread race-based discrimination, terrorism, and despair, black codes, Jim Crow, peonage, and lynchings, an economic collapse, in a world at war. 90% of the African continent, colonized by 7 European nations, and Africans throughout the diaspora, systemically oppressed, with few signs of better days ahead. In spite of these things and more, less than 1 decade after his arrival to America, he was leading the largest black movement in the history of the world. His name, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. His organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which he and his first wife, Amy Ashwood, previously launched in Jamaica in 1914. Though the ideology of Pan-Africanism was slowly taking hold amongst some during this era, it was Marcus Garvey's vision of a strong, self-sufficient global black nation, along with his scholarship, total commitment, and organizing prowess that was pivotal in taking Pan-Africanism from theory to practice. From May of 1917, when the New York branch of the UNIA was launched, the first branch on American soil, through June of 1923, the accomplishments of the UNIA against all odds and all efforts to stop them grew and grew. These accomplishments include over 4 million members worldwide, even more supporters, over 1,000 branches of the organization throughout 42 countries, the Negro World newspaper, a shipping company, the Black Star Line, the Negro Factories Association, wholesale, retail, and manufacturing businesses, grocery stores, restaurants, laundrettes, a printing press, tailor shop, black doll manufacturing, a trucking company, hotels, farms, a nursing agency, and a paramilitary division, established our flag, the red, black, and green, and established the Declaration of Rights of the Negro peoples of the world. The accomplishments made by Marcus Garvey in the UNIA laid a foundation of strength and self-determination that inspired widespread liberation movements, leading to 55 African nations winning their independence. His example is still used as the blueprint for progressive action around the world. Marcus Garvey, elected to serve as the Provisional President of Africa by delegates representing 25 countries, was and is a global symbol of black pride, unity, and self-determination. A symbol that directly or indirectly influenced the trajectory of our greatest heroes and sheroes. From activists such as Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer, Steve Biko, Ida B. Wells, and Kwame Ture, to nation builders such as Haile Selassie I, Kwame Nkrumah, Nelson Mandela, Sekou Toure, Elijah Muhammad, Leonard P. Howell, and Jomo Kenyatta. From communities like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to the Harlem Renaissance, from scholars and business leaders to athletes and entertainers, from the early 1900s to this very day. The list of those inspired by the greatness of the Garvey movement and its legacy of Black pride, progress, and knowledge of self is endless. After being wrongfully convicted of mail fraud in 1923 and given a 5-year prison sentence, in 1927, his sentence was commuted and he was deported back to Jamaica, where he and his second wife, Amy Jacques Garvey, were met by the largest and most enthusiastic crowd in Jamaica's history. Marcus Garvey transferred UNIA headquarters back to Jamaica, ran a daily newspaper called The Black Man, started the first political party, the People's Political Party, and successfully got 3 members of that party elected to the Kingston City Council. This visionary leader, considered one of the 3 pillars of Pan Africanism and a prophet of the Rastafarian faith, died of a stroke on June 10, 1940 in London, England, at just 53 years of age. He was survived by his loving wife, Amy Jacques Garvey, a brilliant revolutionary in her own right, and his 2 sons, Marcus Garvey Jr. and Julius Garvey, both endowed with their father's progressive vision and revolutionary spirit. From statues, parades, street and school namings, to books, lectures, and the pouring of libations, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Jamaica's first national hero, continues to be honored throughout the world. Though physically no longer with us, the spirit of Marcus Garvey is still felt, his contributions still remembered, and his name still recounted during acts of Black pride, acts of Black unity, and acts of Black liberation to this very day. The year was 1916, when a 29-year-old Jamaican-born man with a love for Africa, pride in African people, and a vision of Pan-African unity, love, and strength, arrived on America's eastern shores, armed with an impenetrable sense of purpose, duty, and destiny. Just 54 years The year was 1916, when a 29-year-old Jamaican-born man with a love for Africa, pride in African people, and a vision of Pan-African unity, love, and strength, arrived on America's eastern shores, armed with an impenetrable sense of purpose, duty, and destiny. Just 54 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, 51 years after the end of the Civil War, with the vast majority of blacks in America still mentally enslaved, experiencing widespread race-based discrimination, terrorism, and despair, black codes, Jim Crow, peonage, and lynchings, and economic collapse in a world at war. 90% of the African continent, colonized by 7 European nations, and Africans throughout the diaspora, systemically oppressed, with few signs of better days ahead. In spite of these things and more, less than 1 decade after his arrival to America, he was leading the largest black movement in the history of the world. His name, Marcus Mosiah Garvey. His organization, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which he and his first wife, Amy Ashwood, previously launched in Jamaica in 1914. Though the ideology of Pan-Africanism was slowly taking hold amongst some during this era, it was Marcus Garvey's vision of a strong, self-sufficient global black nation, along with his scholarship, total commitment, and organizing prowess that was pivotal in taking Pan-Africanism from theory to practice. From May of 1917, when the New York branch of the UNIA was launched, the first branch on American soil, through June of 1923, the accomplishments of the UNIA against all odds and all efforts to stop them grew and grew. These accomplishments include over 4 million members worldwide, even more supporters, over 1,000 branches of the organization throughout 42 countries, the Negro World newspaper, a shipping company, the Black Star Line, the Negro Factories Association, wholesale, retail, and manufacturing businesses, grocery stores, restaurants, laundrettes, a printing press, tailor shop, black doll manufacturing, a trucking company, hotels, farms, a nursing agency, and a paramilitary division, established our flag, the red, black, and green, and established the Declaration of Rights of the Negro peoples of the world. The accomplishments made by Marcus Garvey in the UNIA laid a foundation of strength and self-determination that inspired widespread liberation movements, leading to 55 African nations winning their independence. His example is still used as the blueprint for progressive action around the world. Marcus Garvey, elected to serve as the Provisional President of Africa by delegates representing 25 countries, was and is a global symbol of black pride, unity, and self-determination. A symbol that directly or indirectly influenced the trajectory of our greatest heroes and sheroes. From activists such as Malcolm X, Dr. Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer, Steve Biko, Ida B. Wells, and Kwame Ture, to nation builders such as Haile Selassie I, Kwame Nkrumah, Nelson Mandela, Sekou Toure, Elijah Muhammad, Leonard P. Howell, and Jomo Kenyatta. From communities like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to the Harlem Renaissance, from scholars and business leaders, to athletes and entertainers, from the early 1900s to this very day, the list of those inspired by the greatness of the Garvey movement and its legacy of black pride, progress, and knowledge of self is endless. After being wrongfully convicted of mail fraud in 1923 and given a 5-year prison sentence, in 1927, his sentence was commuted and he was deported back to Jamaica, where he and his second wife, Amy Jacques Garvey, were met by the largest and most enthusiastic crowd in Jamaica's history. Marcus Garvey transferred the UNIA headquarters back to Jamaica, ran a daily newspaper called The Black Man, started the first political party, the People's Political Party, and successfully got 3 members of that party elected to the Kingston City Council. This visionary leader, considered one of the 3 pillars of Pan-Africanism and a prophet of the Rastafarian faith, died of a stroke on June 10, 1940 in London, England, at just 53 years of age. He was survived by his loving wife, Amy Jacques Garvey, a brilliant revolutionary in her own right, and his 2 sons, Marcus Garvey Jr. and Julius Garvey. both
I don't think he can
endowed
hear
with their
us. I
father's
logged in about
progressive
52
vision
minutes ago.
and
I've been
revolutionary spirit.
trying to get his attention.
Right, I saw you on
statues,
Facebook. I
parades,
did see you
street
on
and school
Facebook though,
namings,
so you were there.
to
And he
books,
just, I don't know,
lectures, and the pouring of
hear you or
libations.
not.
Marcus Mosiah Garvey,
But somebody's
Jamaica's
got
first
Facebook up
national
now. It's
hero,
original.
continues to be honored throughout the world. Though physically no longer with us, the spirit of Marcus Garvey is still felt, his contributions still remembered, and his name still recounted during acts of black pride, acts of black unity, and acts of black liberation to this very day.
We've had worse.
Is it up? Yeah, whenever you're ready. I'm sorry. Are you ready to speak? In a minute, yes. Okay. Yes. So when the time comes, we'll go from that image, this wall to this. And I'll be up there. Would you like to be? It doesn't matter. I mean, I just want to make sure that. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. I'm Sam Fullwood, Dean of the School of Communication at American University, and I am overjoyed to have everybody here tonight for this Black History Month program. A little bit about what this is all about, and a little bit about our school first. The American University School of Communication has somewhere on the order of about 1,400 students, undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral students, studying communications, journalism, public communications, communication studies, and film and media arts. We're happy tonight that we have some of our students with us from Kurt Braddock's public communications class, and so I'm really happy that this is an opportunity for students to be getting what we like to think of as experiential learning. The other reason that I'm really excited about tonight is because about a year ago, not too long after I became dean, I reached out to my friend Richard Prince, Richard's sitting there, and said that I thought that his journalism's program ought to be a part of what we do here at American University. Richard is a really interesting person, and I happen to think he's brilliant. And I think that the work that he has done over the 30 years that I have known him with keeping a network of African American journalists informed about the goings and comings and the issues that affect them. That was when he started. I asked him about this a few minutes ago, and what we're experiencing tonight actually began in 1991 as a product of the National Association of Black Journalists Journal, which he co-authored and co-edited, and that led later to him setting up a series of roundtable dinners in 1999. It sort of started out as a going away party for a journalist here in Washington, Alice Bonner. And at the end of that dinner, Alice said to Richard, this was such a great event. He pulled together the handful of black journalists working in Washington at that time, and she said, keep this going. And so Richard, through his own pluck and reserves, has kept the roundtables going since 1999. In 2002, the roundtables turned into an online publication, which sort of told the stories of the comings and goings of black journalists, issues that were taking place in the world of journalism. This changed in 2020 when the pandemic struck and these dinners couldn't be held any longer. Richard switched gears and took it online, and the program expanded to where journalists from around the country were able to sit in on these virtual conversations, dinner party conversations. And then it expanded even more because of the topics and the range of interest that people had to Africa and Europe and Asia, so that it is now an international cocktail party virtual. And it was at that point that I said to Richard, we really have to keep this going, much like Alice Bonner did. And so we have brought into a partnership with American University and Richard Prince and the Roundtable to be able to hold these virtual and in-person cocktail party dinners. Won't be very many cocktails, and we hope in the future maybe there will be dinner on our campus so that we can expose it both to students and to the community that Richard has created. So I'm very, very happy about the collaboration that we have with the Journal-isms Roundtable. And without any other ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Richard, who is really our host for the evening. Thank you all for being here.
Well, thank you, Dean Fullwood. Those very nice words. I want to also humble myself a little bit and say that even though I'm the front man, I'm not the only person who's putting this together. I want to shout out our organizing committee that consists of Paul Delaney, who many know as a longtime veteran of the New York Times, Betty Ann Williams, who worked at USA Today and Gannett and is now independent, Yvonne Roman, who is former executive director of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and a longtime member of our committee was Walt Swanston, who passed a few years ago, but she was known as a force within the diversity movement of the journalism industry. So I want to thank them. Now Sam has given you some of the history of what we've been doing. We do think of it as a networking opportunity. We're here to network and to learn. And we have, for those people on Zoom, the chat room, and that's a good place to network if you can't be here in person. So we want to ask everybody to take full advantage of that. Now, since this is Black History Month, I'm so pleased to have with us Joy Moore, whose son made Black history, as the third African American elected governor in the United States, Wes Moore. And we have some cups over there, but you can pretend that you have one in your hand, so we can so we can congratulate Joy and raise a toast to her and wish her and her family much success. So congratulations, Joy. Okay. And of course, we want Joy to say a few words. And also is Roger Glass. Okay. Well, let's have Roger say a few words first, and then we'll go to Joy. Come on up here, Roger.
As Richard just said, my name is Roger Glass, and I'm up here because in early 1980s, I was one of the members of the Washington Association of Black Journalists, along with Wes Moore, Sr., Joy's husband. And just a couple words of what I remember about Wes. First, I found Wes was quiet, but Wes was a hard worker. We could depend on Wes to be there to help set up for meetings, and we could depend on Wes to also help sign up members or whatever we needed from Wes. Wes was there to help out, so I certainly appreciate that, and I appreciate being here and having this opportunity. Around 1984, I became president of the Washington Association of Black Journalists, at which time some of the officers included, some of the leaders included people like Alice Bonner, who was mentioned, the late Sandy Gregg, who was the vice president at the time, Bobby Bowman, Enid Doggett, Isaiah Poole, Marlon Allen, and I could go on and on. There were several other very active members of the organization, and we decided at that time that we needed to establish a Wes Moore Scholarship Fund. So I'm honored to be able to say that at the time we created a Wes Moore Scholarship Fund, and we were able to fund some local high school students who wanted to pursue careers in journalism. And just finally, I have another reason to appreciate the Moore family, and I don't even think Joy knows this, but at the time we set up the scholarship fund, I went and met with Wes's mother, Gwen Moore, Wes Sr.'s mother, Gwen Moore, who lived not far from me on 5th Street near Coolidge High School in Northwest Washington. I went to meet with her to let her know about the scholarship and to invite her to attend the ceremony when we would be awarding the scholarships. At the time, I just had my firstborn daughter, had been born maybe about 2 or 3 months before that. And I was telling Gwen Moore, Wes Moore's Senior's mother and Junior's grandmother, that I was trying to find somebody to take care of my daughter because my wife was about to go back to work in a couple of months. And Gwen Moore mentioned Mary Mahoney, who I'm sure Joy Thomas remembers, who was taken care of. They called him Amari. I think that's his middle name, who was taking care of Wes Moore Jr. at the time. So I talked to Mary Mahoney, and she ended up taking care of becoming my daughter, both my oldest daughter and my youngest daughter's nanny for 12 years. So I got to be thankful to the Moore family for introducing me to Mary Mahoney, who took care of my children and did a very thankful for that. So I'm told to cut. Thank you, Joy. I hope you got the pictures from Darryl Mahoney of your son when he was about 2 years old. So bless you.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Roger. And now let's hear from the lady herself. Joy, what do you got to say? Oh, we can't hear you. Unmute, please. Hold on. We can't hear you yet.
I can hear her.
You can hear her? I can't hear her.
Me too.
She okay?
Something about that technology.
Okay, now we can hear you.
No, thank you. But no, I was just saying I did not know that story. Mary Mahoney was like, she was really, really special to us. And, right after, Wes passed, she was so incredibly nurturing. And so it's really wild. I'm so sorry that I cannot be with you, today. AU is my alma mater. So, I very much wanted to be there, but
Wait a minute. Nobody's applauding when she said AU is her alma mater.
huh?
Thank you.
Yeah, twice. Journalism, broadcast journalism, and print journalism, and the one thing, and because I know I want to really get to your speaker, but after Wes Sr. passed, it was the journalist group, the journalists in Washington who really, really rallied around us, and I will never forget that. And the scholarship fund had the best parties. It was always in October, and usually it was the day that the clocks changed, so we got an extra hour to party. And so I really, really owe so much to them and to all of you. All of I think Ivan was on. He had to leave, and so there's so many people who have really rallied around our family, and that's something that Wes, now governor, is very, very in tune in terms of wanting to make sure that everyone has a voice and a seat at the table. So thank you guys for always, being sort of you keep Washington and the country. How would I say? Because I want to be politically correct. You keep the country honest. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Joy. Okay.
I should go to the lectern here. About a year ago, a colleague of mine in the National Conference of Editorial Writers, Neil Heinen, who was the president of it, who also lives in Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, told me about a project they were conducting there. They are creating a Center for Black Excellence and Culture in Madison because they felt it was needed. They needed someplace. Well, I'm not going to tell you about that. I'll let them tell you about it. They're here to give us an update to members, and I would ask them to spend about no more than 10 minutes, I guess, to tell us where they are now with that project and to egg them on to fulfill their dreams. So Neil and Dr. G and the rest of you, it's all yours.
Richard, thank you very much. I want Dr. G to have the podium here, but I just want to emphasize that as Richard said, this is a project that is badly needed in Madison, whose reputation you might unfortunately be familiar with. Dr. G is a longtime nonprofit leader, faith leader, opinion leader, thought leader, civic leader in Madison, highly respected. He has been a very good source of mine for many years and became a good friend. And he asked me to help co-chair the Capitol campaign, which I was gladly do because the project is so needed and because Madison needs it so badly. I would argue the entire country needs it. I'll leave that up to you to decide. But Dr. G, Dr. Alex G will give you some background on him and on the project and where we stand right now. So Dr. G, thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil. Good evening, everyone. I'm Alex G, and it really is my honor to be here. And Mr. Prince, thank you for this opportunity and for each of you for giving me a few minutes to listen. Is it possible for me to share my screen? If that's not allowed, I can give an update.
Yes, I
without
think it is. Where are people here? You know how to do that?
I just need to have someone enable me. I'm a lifelong resident of Madison, Wisconsin, longest serving faith community leader of any ethnic background or ecumenical affiliation. I get to serve my community in a place where I used to deliver newspapers and grew up playing as a young kid. And it really is wonderful to be able to serve my community in such a powerful way. One of the things that I've noticed is that we are experiencing a tremendous Black brain drain in Madison, but even more generally in the state of Wisconsin. And one of the things that I was able to ascertain by having conversations with over 700 Black informants, asking what is causing so many of us to come to Madison for school, for work, and to leave. And what I heard over and over again is a number of things. One, parents said, oh, thank you for that. Parents said that they wanted their children to be treated like leaders to be developed and not problems to be fixed. And the other piece was the lack of culture, that many Black Madisonians drove to Chicago, which is about 3 hours away, Minneapolis, about 4.5, Detroit, St. Louis, Milwaukee, in order to experience cultural foods, shows, concerts, and plays, and it made people not feel at home. And so after listening to the community and bringing together so many of the various groups that we listen to, moms, young adults in their 20s who were born in Madison, formerly incarcerated folks, tenured faculty, physicians, nurses, state workers. And what people heard was, we want a place to put our stories of Black joy and resilience on the main stage and to share with our children the importance of our cultural contributions as a way of coping with life in Wisconsin. The other thing that we have found is that our mayor and our common council have passed a resolution that states that racism in Madison, Wisconsin is a social determinant of health, which is just a fancy way of saying that it is giving us a shorter lifespan than our white counterparts merely because of the racial strife that we're experiencing. And so this is what we want to do to address it. Can someone, Neil, can everyone see this?
Yes.
My screen? All right, great. I'll just move to this quickly. We decided to do something that was never done in Madison, and that is to create a solution for Black people by Black people. I know this seems like a novel idea, and excuse me if I'm talking fast, I'm just trying to get all of this in. In Madison, Wisconsin, and I say this respectfully because my sister and mother have both served this community as social workers, most of the programs that are designed for Black people are social service programs that are trying to fix something in our community. Very little has to do with promoting what is good and exciting among us. And so we decided to not only listen to 100% Black stakeholders, and nearly 800 of them, we secured a Black architect who could design this facility using colors and shapes and materials that would exude a sense of Blackness, and not just in African American culture, because it is very important to celebrate the African diaspora. And so it was very important for us to do this. This is something that up to this point was fairly novel. In fact, when the architect reported to our group initially, he said it was the first time he'd ever reported to an all-Black group. And it's not a Black firm, but they gave us a Black architect. Madison's not feeling like home for the Black community, so people are leaving. But we've helped to build this beautiful community up, and we want our children to feel at home. As I mentioned earlier, we're losing Black talent at an alarming rate. And this is very alarming, but again, just to reiterate what I said earlier, the piece that is very difficult for me is the underlying health implications. That throughout the state of Wisconsin, we lead the nation in the disparities of Black and white infant mortality rates, Black and white reading levels at the 4th and 8th grade levels, Black and white real estate ownership, mass incarceration. Many places have considered Wisconsin ground zero for Black families compared to their white counterparts. And we can't expect our children to stay in this community and live in this community if this continues to be the case, because it is our belief that it should not be a death sentence to be Black and successful in the state of Wisconsin. This is led by and for the Black community from the organization that has written our business plan, which is headed by Joy Bailey Bryant, whose organization, the U.S. branch of Lord Cultural Resources, did the business plan for the Smithsonian Black History Museum. We have as Neil's counterpart, Francis Huntley Cooper, first Black elected mayor for a city in the state of Wisconsin, Black doctors and professionals and artists who are still hopeful that Madison can be a community that can breed strength and resilience and joy inside our communities. Oh, I will say this. One of the things that Joy Bailey Bryant stated was, because our work focuses on leadership and innovation, history and cultural gatherings, and performance and visual arts, that it makes it unique of anything that she's worked on or seen in the country. That certainly that there are things that focus on one of these, but to have, and within our Center for Leadership and Innovation, we are creating an endowment to hire a full-time Black tenured faculty member to oversee our Center for Black community-based research. We are looking to teach our children about excellence and growth and dreaming about the future by rooting it in culture and history. Because so many of the children in a community like Madison will state, well, Black people don't do this, Black people don't fly, Black people don't plant, Black people don't grow. And so we are giving a reorientation.
Recording in progress. Recording in progress.
Sorry about that.
Okay, let me see. I'm sorry that hold on just a moment. I think that, all right. And all of this helps to promote Black wellness. So now we're working with School of Medicine, and we're working with a researcher whose primary work is with the U.S. Veterans Administration. And when he saw this presentation and the fact that we were using culture to promote excellence and a sense of greater identity, particularly a Pan African identity, he said, I can work with your team to show you, to prove using medical lingo and science that this promotes Black wellness. That if you want to address the microaggressions and the things that are shortening Black lives in the state of Wisconsin, we can show how this can happen with wellness. So we are now promoting the fact that we are focusing on wellness, which is different than health. We're not talking about intervention or health clinic. We have plenty of those, but a sense of wellness, the type of wellness that our Black community had way before integration, when there was more shared Black legacy and excitement and excellence. People often will ask me, well, what are the programs of the center? And I say this, and sometimes I think I'm being curt, but I'm serious, that the program of this Center for Black Excellence in Culture is the collective Black intelligence, the creative Black innovation. That when we are given the liberty to have space in a place where we've not been invited to the table, we've not been asked about the menu, we don't even know the room or the location, and we're handed solutions that don't fit, don't work for us, and historically have never worked for us. When we have an opportunity to have the space to create and to come together and think and plan for ourselves in space that we own with faculty and doctors and professionals and children and moms and formerly incarcerated folks, it makes room for mentoring and leading and teaching and healing and empowering and networking and incubating. What we have found is that when we can have space to be ourselves, we can heal ourselves. And we don't need all the social services that are put on us. Now, again, my mom and sister were good social workers, so I know that there's a need for that. But not everything needs to be fixed with a social program. Some can be, some of the issues can be addressed through just a sense of cultural pride and celebration. We've listened to over 800 Black community members to ask their input and their insight, so that it would not be just one organization's approach or one leader's approach. We've listened to the broader community. We've had gatherings with as many as 1,000 people over the years to find out from the community, what does it take for us to move the needle in making Madison a more welcoming place for the Black community? So in engaging the broader community, we've met with thousands. We've engaged thousands to the point that we've gotten support from our mayor, financial support from our mayor, county executive, governor, and from the federal government through a federal earmark. In listening,
can I interrupt for just a second?
Yes, sir.
We're running behind, so I'd like to just ask two questions of you. number one, what can other cities take from what you're doing? And also, is there a component for people who are interested in being creative, such as future journalists?
Definitely. But in all honesty, Mr. Prince, what our greatest need right now is to tell the story, this Black innovation, and the fact that we have raised over $23 million in about 10 months towards our $36 million goal. So once this is built, we will have so many opportunities for programming. And so to answer your question, yes, there's certainly a case to do that. But most of our focus is really getting this built so that we can construct a debt-free facility that is building on the strength and the collective innovation of hundreds and hundreds of Black leaders in our community. And so definitely we see a place for not only future Black journalists, but Black journalists and Black researchers and professors and physicians and other bankers and lenders. And so there's an opportunity for us to do this and to model this because the strength has been the fact that we work together, and that the business community is understanding that if they don't continue to build a place that is culturally sound and welcoming, they will never meet their DEI goals, and we will never be an inclusive community. And that is an affront to Madison's perception of itself. And so we are able to raise the bar for the livability of our city for everyone if we make it a place that is welcoming to Black people. And that's what we're really focusing on. So yes, there's plenty of room for future journalists, but there's also room for current journalists to help us to tell this story, because we want to continue to put the word out so that we can build this debt-free, so that we can be the national model we really want to be.
Here, here. All right. Where can people find more information about this?
They can find it at theblackcenter.org. Theblackcenter.org. You can email me through that as well. I would love to talk with you more about this, and we want to show what happens when Black people are given the resources to create solutions. No one can do this for us, and this is standing on the collective strengths and stories and culture of Black people. Because if we've made it through everything we have with the little that we've had for the past 400 or 500 years in this country, imagine what we can do when resources are marshaled for us to control our destiny. So I really appreciate this. Please, I'm going to try to type it in the chat room. Theblackcenter.org. I would welcome conversations with individuals, and I'll stop right there because I know that you have a guest speaker, but I'm excited.
All right, thank you very much. Okay.
Is embodied in our speaker here, Dr. Julius Garvey, but we want to answer the question: what is Garveyism, and how did it express itself through journalism? So before we get into hearing from Dr. Garvey itself, we have an interesting guest with us who is on the Zoom, and that is Paula Laura Alberto, and she edited a publication, a book that came out late last year called Voices of the Race, Black Newspapers in Latin America, 1870 to 1960. And many people may be surprised to know that there was a Black press in Latin America. Marcus Garvey's influence was international. He was an internationalist, of course, and born in Jamaica, and a national hero in Jamaica now. But he had influences, as I said, in other parts of North America, in Latin America, and in Africa, when they would let his newspaper to circulate. So I'd like to ask Professor Alberto to tell us a little about his international influence in Latin America.
Hi, thank you. Richard, can you hear me? Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, thank you. Wow, well, it's such an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for this invitation. And thank you all for being here as well. I didn't realize I was going to go before Dr. Garvey.
That's okay.
Maybe I'll just try to be brief, and we can talk a little bit more, in the Q&A if necessary. But as Richard just pointed out, I think one of the things that's best known about Marcus Garvey's work and thought and his influence is that it was worldwide. And I think people generally know, to the extent that they know about his work, outside of North America, it tends to be in the English-speaking Caribbean, the impact that he had, of course, in his home country of Jamaica and in Barbados and in other former parts of the British Empire. But I think less is known about how the Negro World circulated and was received a little further south in Spanish and Portuguese America. So I should note that I am not a scholar of Garveyism in Latin America, but I am a scholar of Afro-Latin American thought, and I work on the Black press in Latin America. So Richard Price kindly invited me to talk a little bit about this. And I thought a good place to start would be to mention just a tiny bit about this book that my colleagues and I co-authored, my colleague George Reed Andrews from the University of Pittsburgh and Jesse Houghton-Garskoff from Harvard. And it's this book. I'm not sharing my screen. I'm just going to sort of low-tech hold the book up to the screen. Voices of the Race. And the man, this wonderful dapper man you see on the front cover, is a man named Benedicto Ferreira, who was an Afro-Argentine man who in the early 1900s published a Black newspaper in Buenos Aires, Argentina, which is thought of as one of the, quote, whiter parts of Latin America, but even there was a very important Black press. So, so the book, I'll just say a couple of things about the Black press in general and how we approach it in the book, and then I'll say a few words about Garvey's influence. The book tries to introduce English language readers to the rich Black press of Latin America, these Black newspapers we chose the period between around 1870 and 1960, but there were Black newspapers before that, and there were many after. That was kind of the core selection that we decided to go for. And the countries we focus on are Argentina, Brazil, Cuba, and Uruguay. And the reason we chose these countries is because they are the ones that had the most sustained Black press in Latin America. It's not that there aren't Black newspapers elsewhere, but those are the ones that had the most Black newspapers. And you can find many of these newspapers if you read Spanish and Portuguese, or if you just want to take a look at them. Many of them are digitized in the national libraries of each of these countries. So in our book, there's an appendix with a list of all of these newspapers. There are 40 for Brazil, 8 that have been digitized for Argentina, although there were more, 13 in Cuba, 17 in Uruguay. And in Latin America, it's rare to find sources written by people of African descent, in part because of the violence of enslavement and because of the lack of access to primary education. And so these newspapers written by and for people of African descent are really one of the richest, or perhaps the richest, concentration of Black voices and Black thought in Latin America. And they touched on all kinds of issues, which we, sort of try to bring together in the book through thematic chapters. Issues of slavery, race and racism, democracy and citizenship, civic and social equality and associations, women and gender, arts and literature, religion, African culture, child rearing, family life, all of these, music, dance, parties, all of these wonderful areas of Black life in Latin America. And although Black newspapers from the United States, and especially the Negro World, Garvey's paper, were incredibly influential in Latin America, and Black thinkers and journalists read them, often in translation or incorporating translations of articles from the Negro World or from the Pittsburgh Courier or from the Chicago Defender into their own newspapers. The opposite has not been true, in part because there has not been as much attention paid to these masterpieces in Latin America itself, and because of the language barriers with the United States. So this is what we tried to do. We selected 110 articles. They have, there's an overall introduction, there are chapter introductions, there are headnotes to each article that help situate and give historical context. There are extensive footnotes. So we hope that if you are interested in the history of Black journalism in Latin America, that you might take a look at the book. And all the royalties go to supporting Black organizations in Latin America. And I can say a little bit more about the Black press later if you're interested, but I wanted to get to Garvey's influence. And we have two articles in the book that directly discuss Garvey and his ideas. And even though there are only two articles, they actually speak volumes about the ways that Garveyism was received and debated in Latin America. And this in turn, the different ways that people discussed and received Garvey's ideas help us think about the variety of attitudes toward anti-racism and the best way to fight racism that existed across the Americas. So one article that we have is from, actually both articles are from Brazilian newspapers. It's a Brazilian newspaper called O Getulino, which was the nickname of a famous Black Brazilian abolitionist. And the article, it's from the southern state of Sao Paulo, which received an enormous amount of European immigration. And so racism was, the color line was particularly stark and violent there. The article is from October of 1924, and it reports admiringly on what it calls, quote, a colossal convention of Black people. And it is referring to the UNIA's Fourth International Convention in New York in August of 1924. So the article describes in very positive terms the goal of Garvey's movement. And it says, quote, the goal is to forge a vast political union aimed at protecting and demanding respect for the rights of the Black race, end quote. And the journalists described with awe, and again with much admiration, the 30,000 delegates who marched along in the parade route, heralded by 6 orchestras, and they say, quote, at the front of it all marched Marcus Garvey, surrounded by Black soldiers who were magnificently attired, end quote. So again, this sort of power to perform this kind of orderliness and strength in numbers and sort of very elegant clothing and so forth was something that they admired. And the editors at O Getulino promised to send a bound volume of their own newspaper to the convention's closing exhibit in order to, quote, attest to the degree of advancement of our people in Brazil, end quote. So they wished to share their own Black journalism with Marcus Garvey and his followers so that they could sort of see that Brazil was also grappling with many of the same issues. But there was a very different, sorry.
What were some of the issues that they thought that they had in common with the African Americans in the United States?
Oh, so segregation was not formal. The Constitution, and after the abolition of slavery in 1888, the Constitution formally instituted race-blind citizenship. Everyone was theoretically equal before the law, but that is not how it worked in practice. So informally, practices of segregation meant that people would be barred from entering certain businesses. Black Brazilians would be harassed by the police. They would be tried differently by juries. They would be given harsher sentences for crimes. The vast majority of people who were poor were Black, and the vast majority of people who were Black were poor. They were systematically marginalized from the job market, and they were not able to compete in the job market because there was affirmative action for white European immigrants, essentially, who were brought over from Europe by the government and given land sometimes, or given preferential treatment for jobs. And that's just, a small slice of the indignities.
I think a lot of people would say not much has changed.
Not much has changed, yeah. I mean, Brazil now has tragically one of the highest rates of murder of its own Black citizens. So this is what they were struggling with, and struggling for full recognition. And in some ways they argued it was worse in Brazil because the law did not make this discrimination explicit. So they were
would you say that is what the attraction of Garveyism was to?
Exactly. So the attraction of Garveyism was that it was explicitly a Black movement, right? That it was fighting against racism, but also imperialism, against class oppression, but it was race first. It centered Blackness transnationally across national borders as a source of pride, and it centered anti-Black racism as the key problem that was a systemic problem around the world. And so for many thinkers in Brazil, this was enormously clarifying. So even if they weren't going to join Garvey's movement, they found it an inspiration for how to think about race, how to talk about racism back home. And a few years later, a different newspaper led by the very famous Afro-Brazilian journalist José Correia Leite would begin to include a page called O Mundo Negro, which is the Negro World in Portuguese, in which he translated.
Could you spell his name?
Oh, yes. Should I put it in the chat?
Please do.
José Correia Leite, Leite. And I wrote about him and his colleagues' thought in my first book, which I can then share with you later, which is about Black intellectuals in 20th century Brazil. But Leite started actually, he had a colleague who could translate from the English and who received the Negro World from Black sailors who traveled to Brazil. And they would regularly publish columns in Portuguese from the Negro World, you know, talking about, you know, the color line and the color bar in South Africa, or what's going on in Haiti, what's going on in the United States. Ethiopia was a major source of interest because in the 1930s, Mussolini's Italy invaded Ethiopia. And in Sao Paulo, Brazil, Black Brazilians were living side by side with Italian immigrants who were often fascist and racist. And so they were using information about, you know, Italy's invasion of Ethiopia to kind of fight their own battles against Italian immigrants at home. So the Negro World provided enormous support, information, and inspiration.
Stop you there, because I think you provided a good segue for us to hear from the man himself.
Wonderful.
So let me say that anyone who has questions for Professor Alberto can put them in the chat or ask them later on when we have our discussion. But now I want to ask Mel Foote to introduce our main speaker. And thank you very much,
Professor. Okay. My name is Mel Foote. I'm the president of an organization called Constituency for Africa, CFA. And our mission is to educate Americans about Africa, to improve cooperation and coordination among the organizations that work on African issues. And we shape the United States policies toward Africa. Recently, we had the U.S.-Africa Summit in December. We were heavily involved in shaping what Biden would think about Africa. And a lot of the things that went into the summit came from us. So we are like a lobby, and we push the U.S. government to do better things on Africa. Before I get started, I want to call Richard to come forward. I got a gift for you. Dr. Garvey. Dr. Garvey and I both signed it, so I want you to hold on to it. But it's from Chester Higgins, called Sacred. Chester Higgins did all his work around the civilization up the Nile River. And so we think that you're one of the people who deserve this book. So I told Chester I'm going to give it to you tonight. And he said, so I'm going to send him the picture tonight. And just want you to know.
Well, thank you very much. This is quite a surprise. And I'll treasure this. Thank you. Now, we want to keep everything short. I just want to remind everybody.
Well, Garvey just, it takes him an hour to warm up. But without further ado, I want to introduce you to Dr. Julius Garvey, who is a cardiovascular scholar by training. And he is the son of Marcus Garvey, who was the preeminent Pan Africanist of the world. And so most importantly, he's my good friend. And so without further ado, Dr. Julius Garvey.
Thank you. No, please.
Well, journalism actually was the expression of Garveyism, because if you look back to the 20s, that was the means of communication. Of course, there was no internet and none of the other means of communication that you have at the present time. There was no cell phone and so on, and things that you have grown accustomed to. So the way in which people communicated was by word of mouth or by newspapers or by magazines. So journalism was the key. My dad, at age about 12 or so, was apprenticed to his godfather in Jamaica, who was a printer. So he learned printing at a very, very early age and became a master printer. And you know, as you can understand from being around printing and the printing press, then you learn the value of words. And in one of his lessons, Message to the People, he talks about how he educated himself. He doesn't say, this is how I educated myself, but he says, this is how you should be educated. And he would talk about basically, you know, having a dictionary in his pocket. And then every day he would learn, you know, 2 new words and practice writing those new words in sentences. And then he would go around to the different churches, etc. And then when he traveled, he'd go to the Parliament in Britain and so on, and see how people spoke and their oratory, and see the mannerisms. And then growing up, of course, he was involved in elocution contests. So at the center of who and what he was this whole business of communication, whether it was by word of mouth, shall we say, or by word of word. And the Negro World, which was the newspaper of the UNIACL, had the largest circulation of a black weekly in the world, certainly in the United States, and definitely also in the world. And this occurred in a very, very short time. And I think also what was important about that is that it introduced internationalism, shall we say, to America, especially to Black America. Because as you know, Black America had gone through enslavement, it had gone through Jim Crow and sharecropping and so on, and the educational opportunities were limited, plus the fact that the journalism, it was basically a propagandist journalism that talked only about what was happening in America as if America was the center of the world. But my father came from a background of travel. He grew up in Jamaica, but he traveled throughout Latin America, to Costa Rica, to Panama, to Nicaragua, and Colombia, etc., over a period of 2 years, came back to Jamaica, and then went to Europe. He lived in London, but he traveled to France and Germany, etc., Scotland and Ireland. And then he came to the United States, and within a year, he traveled through 38 states on his own. So this was how he absorbed information, and he had an international outlook, which then he passed on through his journalism to the African American public. So that was something novel in terms of Africans in America looking outside of America and understanding that the problems that they faced in America were global problems. The other thing that was innovative about the journalism and the newspaper, the Negro World, that the editorial page was translated into French and Spanish. So then it encompassed Latin America as well. I didn't know that there was a Portuguese part of it, although this was done by the Portuguese in Brazil. It wasn't done by the Negro World itself in terms of more languages, but it was English, Spanish, and French. And then in terms of how it went around the world, again, you know, in terms of travel at that time was by boat. And how it went around the world was with the sailors, black sailors on boats, taking the Negro World, I mean, all around the world to the different ports that they went to. And, you know, one interesting anecdote, shall we say, which is in Jomo Kenyatta's book, Facing Mount Kenya. He would say that, you know, when somebody brought the latest edition of the Negro World newspaper to Kenya, the people would gather around and they would read the editorial page by Marcus Garvey over and over until it was memorized by a group now that ran off into the different villages to spread the word. So that's the importance of journalism, at that time. Of course, now, you have so many other means of communication. But it's interesting to note that with that form of journalism, and certainly with his own travels and his own art and his own charisma, in a very short period of time, let's say from 1916 to 1920, they were able to have 2 million members, and another few years 4 million members, topping probably 6 million members, and more people following him in 42 countries. So again, that was the dispersion in terms of what journalism was able to do in terms of, shall we say, appealing to the hearts and minds of people who are receptive to the message at that time. I mean, also was the heart of the Harlem Renaissance in terms of the location was in New York City, and of course in Harlem. And my good friend will tell us about all the different people who wrote for the Negro World, people such as Zora Neale Hurston and so on, because it was the page of culture in terms of poetry, et cetera, and it espoused, if you will, Black consciousness. It would not take ads about straightening of hair and whitening of skin, et cetera. So it projected Black consciousness in terms of pride, in terms of who we were as an African people. So again, it was the backbone of the Black consciousness movement, certainly that came and manifested itself during the Harlem Renaissance, which was a flowering of the creativity of African Americans. So, it's of great importance, and you young people, in terms of journalism, you can change the world, but as students of journalism and practitioners, you should not sell your soul, because I think what has happened to a lot of journalists in this country is they're more purveyors of propaganda than actually transmitters of truth. So this is something that you have to deal with for yourself. Obviously, everybody needs a job in a sense and a profession, but don't sell your soul and write the propaganda that your newspaper or whatever it is that you're working for tells you to write. Try to be honest, because honest journalism will transform the world in the right direction. Thank you.
Okay, we'll have chances for questions for Dr. Garvey, but I want to have, oh my goodness, he's got some stuff with him. Senghor Baye, who's one of the current leaders of the UNIA, which is the Universal Negro Improvement Association.
Yeah. Greetings, everybody. Can y'all hear me? Greetings. Okay, I'm gonna be talking kind of fast. I'm gonna try to get a lot in, okay? But it's being recorded, so you can catch it if you miss something. All right. Anyway, thank you for inviting me, Dr. Garvey. Always a pleasure, especially to come after you and not before you. Brother Mel and everybody that's here. Brother Roger, got to call you out. That's my homie from way back. But real quickly, you all, and following up what Dr. Garvey was saying, Garvey's deportation, and by the way, I got notes, because Garveyites can be long-winded. If I don't use the notes, we'll be here for an hour. But anyway, Garvey's deportation to Jamaica, thank you. Garvey's deportation to Jamaica after conviction on trumped-up charge of mail fraud, the editors, associate editors, and literary editors of the Negro World included the following luminaries: William H. Ferris, historian and literary critic and graduate of Harvard and Yale; Herbert H. Harrison, perhaps Harlem's best known and most respected intellectual; Eric D. Walrod, a major short story writer of the Harlem Renaissance; T. Thomas Fortune, the dean of Afro-American journalists, veteran Republican Party activist, and former aide to Booker T. Washington; and John Edward Bruce, founder in 1911 of the Negro Society of Historical Research, and a man whose journalistic and political credentials rivaled those of Fortune. The artistic contribution of Garvey and the Negro World may have been greater had not the work of the UNIA been hindered from 1923 to 1927 by Garvey's trial, imprisonment, and deportation. Yet, some good was salvaged from that, for it was in prison that Garvey wrote much of his own poetry. No other publication of the time, neither the opportunity nor the crisis, nor anything else came close to the Negro World. For the sheer magnitude of its literary output, this was compounded by the fact that unlike the more vaunted literary journals of the period, the Negro World was a weekly rather than a monthly publication. Negro World literary activities peaked during the periods of 1920 and 1923, but remained a part of the paper until its demise in 1933. During the early 1920s, as many of dozens of poems, short stories, book reviews, articles of literary criticism, and the lack might be found in a single issue of the paper. The authors might range from major literary and intellectual figures like William H. Ferris, Eric Warrod, Zora Neale Hurston, Arthur Schomburg, J.A. Rogers, Alan Locke, Herbert Harrison, and John Edward Bruce, to unknown aspiring writers from Africa, Afro-America, Canada, Central America, the Caribbean, and any place where the UNIA was established and the paper was read. Now, I'm going to also give you some things all the way up to today, because that's important. But right after the Negro World, there was so many other papers, and let me name them. The Watchman in Jamaica that Garvey worked with. The La Nation in Port Limon, Costa Rica. The La Prensa in Colón, Panama. The Bluefields Messenger in Costa Rica, he was a co-publisher. And of course, the Negro World from 1918 to 1933, and the Daily Negro Times in Harlem from 1922 to 1924. Of course, now, the Black Man magazine, which was done from 1929, or actually, it was a Black Man newspaper that was done from 1929 to 1931. And then the New Jamaican, 1932 to 1933. 1933 to 1939, the Black Man magazine. I have a copy of all of the Black Man magazine. That's very, very important because we're talking about continued journalism. So even though Garvey was excommunicated from the United States, and he had problems in Jamaica too, we won't get too into that, but then he ended up in London, in the UK, and in the UK, he continued to revive the great works of the 1920s and the 1930s. I'm telling you, this is very, very important. The Black Man magazine went all the way up to 1939. Marcus Garvey left us in 1940 physically, but we believe life to life. We know Garvey's legacy still lives. That's why it's important for you to understand that Garvey was not only a journalist, he was a playwright, he was a poet, and he was an organizer, but never forget Amy Jocks Garvey. Amy Jocks Garvey, his wife, was also a journalist and also a writer in the Negro World in the women's section. And she wrote and copied all of the writings of Marcus Garvey, consequently published his works. Now, what happened years after Garvey left us, physically? Garvey's voice was established in the 1950s. In fact, Honorable Charles L. James, who was one of my teachers who studied with Garvey, made sure that him and Thomas W. Harvey, they worked to bring the Garvey's voice back. I'm happy to tell you that even our dear brother, Dr. Julius Garvey, at one time was the editor in 1963 of that Garvey's voice. Now, what happened years after? I joined the UNI in 1980. So there was a period between the 60s to 1980 where Garvey's voices were being done. We got all of them too, okay? But then we got into UNIA, and as I moved up the ladder and became, actually I was elected President General in 2008 to 2016, we brought back Garvey's voice. In fact, the editor is on there, Zama. You don't see his picture, but then we started doing the Garvey's voice again. So I just brought these so you could understand the communication that we spoke about, that Dr. Garvey gave us, taught us. he passed on in the course of African philosophy on to other leaders who came into the organization. Even though we don't have millions of members, we got many divisions, even on the continent, in the UK, and in the US of A. So we still are doing the work. So in closing, I also did a book because I wanted to make sure that my legacy from 1980 to 2016, and now we're still going. Now today, we have group that we still are doing the UNIA work, and I'm now serving as First Assistant President General. However, it's not about me, he or she, it's about we, you all. So journalists, please speak truth to power. As Dr. Garvey so clearly said, it is important to speak truth to power because it's too many journalists that are not speaking truth to power, taking us away from the true stories and consequently causing problems for us. So don't be content with the food of chickens. One God, one aim, one destiny.
All right, it's time for a little discussion. I'm sure people have questions or comments that they want for any of our speakers. That applies to people on Zoom as well as in the room. So does anybody have a question for any of these fine folks? No? Okay, let me look at the Zoom. Oh, Michelle, is that you? Okay.
Oh, thanks. Sorry. Hello. First of all, thank you for coming. It's a pleasure. I'm Michelle Martin. You were, what, 7 or 8 years old when your dad died, correct? So I was interested in how you absorbed his story and his goals. How was this passed to you? How was the culture passed to you?
Well, we didn't get into my mother since the topic was really about my dad in that sense. But the last time I saw my dad was in England. I was 5 years old, and we came back to Jamaica because my brother had arthritis, the weather in England, and we were advised to come back to Jamaica as a son. And then he died when we were in Jamaica. I was 7 years old. Don't do the math, please. Anyway, so, you know, my memories of my dad are childhood memories of a 5-year-old, 3 to 5 years of age. And those are simply of a huge person, so to speak, very kind, very loving, you know, playing with in the backyard in England, snowballs, etc., taking me to the movie, that sort of thing. So the message of Garveyism, shall we say, was transmitted to me by my mother. My mother was his right hand, his advocate. She collected his works and so on, Philosophy and Opinions, Volume 1, 2. There's also Volume 3, but the Volume 1 and 2, they were published while he was in jail in Atlanta through a collection of his writings and speeches. She, in terms of the Negro World, I think it was mentioned, Senghor, she ran the women's page. So she was a feminist before there was such a thing as feminism. She was very much an intellectual. She was very well educated in Jamaica. And so she challenged him always in debates and so on and so forth. So the women's page was not about frivolities, not about sewing and so on, or stuff in the kitchen. It was all about issues that women were involved in. And, you know, she never remarried, so she remained true to his memory, if you will. So there were no men coming into the house or, you know, that sort of thing. Only, you know, political figures per se. So that was the kind of household that I grew up in. And, you know, she always told me, I shouldn't say me, but my brother. I have an older brother who was Marcus Jr. He died 2 years ago. So she brought us up with these memories and understanding of our father as an international figure. And then at some sense, she used him somewhat as a bogeyman, meaning that, you know, you can't do that because your father wouldn't approve. You have to live up to your father, you know, you're Marcus Garvey's son, and so on and so forth. So she set a very high bar, but she also, you know, told us about the exploits and what his mission was about. So we really grew up as Pan Africanists, shall we say. And we also grew up in some sense with the Garvey courage and the Garvey backbone. and the concept of excellence in terms of whatever we do. My brother went in the direction of engineering and physics, and he ended up teaching and so on, but working in that field. I went into the medical field, et cetera, So I think both myself and my brother, we owe, our development and our understanding as African people to my mother and her upbringing. Sure. Well, no, my brother did a bit of that. And he was Marcus Jr. And, of course, Marcus Jr., you're going to be like your father, and so on and so forth. I was the younger brother. I got a little bit of that, but I was able to escape that. So it really fell on his shoulders. So I was a little bit of a renegade. I was allowed to go my own way. And he did go into politics to some degree, as well as his academic stuff. And he tried to recreate my father's party, the People's Political Party, in Jamaica. But then, Jamaica had, shall we say, I can't use the word progress, but maybe retrogress, in terms of the way politics were going. It was being influenced by America, et cetera, and his attempt to revive the party was pretty much squashed. Of course, he became head of the UNIA before Senghor, from about 1990, Senghor to about 2002. Yeah, for about a 10-year, 12-year period, he was President General of the UNIA here in the United States, and actually globally. So he was involved in politics of the organization. I became a surgeon, yes, medical person surgeon. Yeah, this is something of a précis of volumes 1 and 2 of the Philosophy and Opinions that my mother put together. And it tries to focus on the message, the teachings of Marcus Garvey, as opposed to being more dilatory, which 2 volumes are. And, young people don't read as much as we used to do in the day, so to speak, back in the day. So this is only 150 pages. So the idea is to attract the younger generation so they understand what Garveyism was all about, and they understand, the shoulders that they stand on. And, for example, the Black Lives Movement, I don't know that it's really grounded, and I think they need to be grounded in Garveyism. So that's the purpose of the book, Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, revised by me. Thank you. Thanks, man. Yeah.
Question, an answer to which I should know, are there any films, movies, documentaries that focus on your dad?
There's several out there, but not necessarily approved by me and not necessarily genuine, because, people are still trying to distort the message. So a real good story about Marcus Garvey in terms of a documentary or a movie has not been out there yet, as far as I'm concerned.
I put a link in for Stanley.
Stanley Nelson did a documentary in 2000. Oh, okay. It was on PBS, and so YouTube. So people. It could be. Oh, it was okay. Well, thanks for that. Stanley, really?
He actually did a feature of black newspapers and never talked about the Negro World. Do the research.
I remember that documentary he did. Okay.
Yes. But I'm sorry we don't have Stanley here to defend himself. But
we talked to him before.
Oh, I see. All right, let's go to this young lady here.
Well, my name is Shania Yates, and my question is free for whoever feels comfortable answering. With so many different media outlets, whether it be print, mainstream news, blogs, whatever it may be, just social media, do you feel that those philosophers with the important messages are still being amplified in the same ways as they were in the 1920s and 30s with such limited resources?
No. The answer is no. But let me just say, there are great attempts being made to correct that. Right here, this brother right here has a short 8-minute film that probably has more information in it than 2 or 3 of the movies that they talked about together. So it's all about how you use it, and Garvey taught us to be science par excellence. So as Dr. Garvey said, for youth, we look for the youth to do that. Now we do have young people on the continent and outside of the United States and in the United States that are working on trying to, I should say, ameliorate that situation.
I want to add to that. Over the last 10 years, 15 years, black media has been decimated. And when I grew up, it was Jet Magazine. If you want to know where black people are at, just go to the barbershop. There's a Jet Magazine. Ebony is gone. Emerge Magazine, which was the Black Newsweek, gone. And BET even, with the dancing and hip hop, gone. And so why is that? That we don't have the capacity now to even tell our own story, not even to tell it to each other.
I have to object to that.
Amen.
We're in a different era now where we have the internet, and there are many, many black websites that are doing the job that printed black press once did. So I would just add that.
But most of it is being geared towards those who want to see or perpetuate the misinterpretation of black people or amplify what we're viewed as. So we have BT Plus, which is black women fighting each other, or what's the other one? Zeus Network, which is horrible to say the least. So arguably, no.
All right. That's an opinion. That's an opinion. Okay.
There's no worse than CNN or Fox. I mean,
Agreed.
One or the other. Where's the middle? I mean, you have CNN, Fox. I mean, they're poles apart. Where's the middle ground in America now? It's non-existent. I think.
I agree.
Well, maybe you're going to be one of the people who comes up with her own website.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
There's no disagreement here. In fact, we are criticizing and being critical, but the reality, I work with a group, and a group works with the UNIA called Black Star Action Network International. They all grew out of the hip hop movement in the United States. The headquarters is in Sierra Leone. Malcolm X's grandson was one of the founding members of the Black Star Action Network International to try to fill that void that you're speaking about, because they weren't only artists, they were activists. So they understood that we have to use our creativity, and young people have to help ameliorate the problem. Like he said, when I grew up, there was plenty of black media. So where is it now? And it was black media that spoke to the issues that were relevant. So yes, we have a lot of work to do, but it is on our young people, and this being you putting it out there, you and others like you should change that situation. Because if you don't, what's going to happen to the generation behind us?
Well, I see on the Zoom is Yannick Reich-Lamb. Yannick, can you hear us and see us? She teaches journalism at Howard University, and she has her own website called
Fierce for Black Women. So Yannick, I'd be interested in your, exactly. I'd be curious as to your opinion on this.
But the media?
About the lack of serious.
I didn't hear the first word. The lack of what kind of?
Serious.
Oh, serious. There's a lot of local things being started across the country, and some of those are serious or in between. But again, we don't have like an Emerge or something like that, and some of the things that we do have been trying to reach kind of a mass audience. So they have more of a mixture of content than say an Emerge when we had that. So we do need something that's national or international that can consistently kind of speak to different issues and hold people to account. But it is happening a little bit with some local places here and there, but there's still startups in many cases.
Right. Okay. I wonder if Dwayne wants to weigh in on that. Founding dean of the School of Journalism. global journalism and communication at Morgan State. Dwayne, do you have anything to add to that?
You baited me while I was writing Paulina. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I said you're baiting me while I was actually writing Paulina a note about some research that I was gleaning from her book. Her book on the Black press in South America, which is really a great resource for a documentary that I'm now producing on the life of Ellen Irene Diggs, a Black anthropologist who taught at Maryland at Morgan for 29 years. So I was distracted by my efforts to tell her.
Look at your pass. All right, we have another question.
Yeah, so my name is Kendall. I'm a sophomore journalism student, but you both emphasized the importance of reporting the truth. So I just wanted to know, like, whoever wants to answer this, but as a future journalist, how do I navigate kind of reporting the truth in a predominantly white field without compromising my Blackness and kind of just like, yeah, basically without compromising my Blackness and still reporting the truth and my people's truth without like whatever company I'm working for, like going against their values and things like that.
Well, I think you're right on point. It's going to be difficult. Because what I see out here now is, you see what's going on in Florida. They don't even want to talk about the formation of our country. They don't want to talk about what we did to the American Indians. They don't want to talk about slavery. I was at the Brookings Institute last week, and one guy stood up and said, he was making a comment, and he said, most people think America was built on the back of slavery. And then he said, no, it's not. It was built because we had a good economic strategy. In other words, what he was saying was that economic strategy, we worked for 400 years for free. And that was the economic strategy he's talking about. But he was saying they want to erase all of that. And so your generation is going to be taxed with that. When I think about John Lewis and when I think about Martin Luther King and Malcolm and Julius Garvey, I mean, they had to stand up for something, and you're going to have to stand up for something. I assure you of that. So it's not an easy question.
No, I agree with him, but it is important to be self-reliant. And I know a young brother who's a great journalist, went to GW, and he ran up against the wall that you just talked about. So he left. But now he has his own book out. He works for the Washington Informer. He's one of the baddest international journalists that I know. So my point, it might be difficult, but if you want to speak truth to power, be self-reliant. You might have to create your own newspaper or your own ways of syndicating your articles to people who are more friendly, okay? But don't stop. Don't stop speaking truth to power, because a lot of people, just like yourself, and we got to have jobs. We got to make money, right? So they compromise, and it also compromises their integrity. You follow what I'm saying? So I suggest you don't do that. And I'm gonna make sure that we can communicate, because it's up to your generation to make the change. And maybe you can get with some other great journalists, and you all can get together cooperatively and create your own newspaper. Oh yeah,
I mean,
Sam P.K. Collins.
I mean, I've been working in journalism my entire adult life. And one thing I would say to you, there's no one black truth. I think it is really important that Dr. Garvey is here, because an honest accounting of Dr. Garvey's movement would indicate that black people within that movement had disagreements all the time. All the time. You indicated, Dr. Garvey, that when your father went back to Jamaica and was involved in politics there, they were bitter rows about the best way forward, what was ideal, what was the optimal way forward for black people. So what I'm saying to you, and if you're familiar at all with the history of W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington and their various strategies for black advancement. So I guess I would like to dissuade you from the idea that there is one black truth that you are put here to tell. You are here to report stories to the best of your ability. You are here to tell the truth. You are here to have integrity. You are here to, first you need to master master your craft, okay? Master your craft. Master yourself, have emotional discipline, have intellectual discipline, strive for excellence, and the truth will come. But I really need to dissuade you from the notion that there's one black truth. If there were one black truth, why do we have like two black people running for mayor against each other? You see my point? If you've ever run for office here at AU and, you know, maybe, I don't know there was this whole situation here with the black head of student government here a couple years ago. I don't want to bring that up, but you see my point? Black people are allowed to disagree. Black people are allowed to have different points of view. Reporting those accurately and with fairness, civility, excellence, intelligence, that is your job. That is your job, okay? If I may say it that way. And I personally feel, and you all can judge my work for yourselves, I feel like I have never compromised my integrity through 40 years of practicing this field. So I feel that all adults have to make hard decisions at times, but that doesn't mean you're selling your soul. It means you're being an adult and mastering the circumstances as they exist. And yes, there are times when there will be hard choices and you'll have to fight with people, but newsflash, a lot of people do, and it isn't specifically a black problem, if I may say. Now, there obviously are challenges of being a person of color. Lots of people in institutions that were not built for us that we did not build, but there are also challenges to, if you want to speak to a broad audience, then that's the challenge you're going to have. And I urge you to stay at it, and I urge you to keep fighting, because as Senghor said, that is one thing we agree with. The next generation has to pick up the baton, because we're going to get tired, and you're going to pick it up, and you will do better than I will. You will be better than I will, you will be smarter than I will, you will be more excellent than I will, you will be tougher than I will, and you will do more. But you have to stay at it. Is that it?
There's no such thing as an orthodox black view. There's not. I bet you we could just take a poll here. We'll include our white guests too, but we'll take everybody. And you ask a question, and you'll come up not with two sides, but you'll come up with wide variance. There's no such thing as a black orthodoxy. I mean, that case, what about Malcolm? What about Roy Wilkins? Whitney Young? And what about, and exactly, well, that's why we started, that's why we're here. Yeah.
I mean, in his time, there were many black people. But anyway, I think we need to move on to let everybody know who we are individually. So we're going to have our introductions, and we want people to keep them brief. We're going to start with the people on Zoom, so we know who they are. I'm going to go to, Sharon Farmer comes up. She's on Zoom, but she's also here. Sharon, where are you? Oh, okay. Please identify yourself. Tell us who you are.
Southeast D.C., Washington, D.C., Ohio State, still looking for freedom. So you all have to make sure that you never stop telling the truth. And it's about your vision and nobody else's when you write your truth. But write your truth. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sharon. Roger Witherspoon. Unmute, please.
Journalist for about 60 years.
Okay. We can hear you now.
Okay. I've been a journalist for about 60 years, including following Richard at a couple of publications. and I worked in newspapers, radio, TV, all of it, and a couple of books here and there. And I appreciate the conversation this evening, as usual.
All right, very good. Thank you, Roger. Dwayne Wickham. Dwayne. Unmute, please. Unmute. Okay. You're unmuted, I think.
What are you asking?
All right, just to introduce yourself.
You'd like me to introduce myself?
Introduce yourself, please. That's all. So we know who you are.
I'm Dwayne Wickham. I'm the Dean Emeritus of the School of Global Journalism and Communication at Moore State University. I tried to retire last year, but was pulled into making documentaries for the university. And we completed one this fall, and I'm now deeply involved in another, which is why I've been distracted, because Paula Alberto and I are exchanging messages about the black media's coverage of the study of my current documentary in South Africa. I'm sorry, South America.
Thank you, Dwayne.
I did, by the way.
I'm glad you two connected.
I did, Richard, let me just say, I did listen as I was writing. I was trying to do two things at once. The interesting discussion about whether we are of one mind and one purpose as black journalists or not. And you know, that discussion has gone on a lot. It is, I think, in many ways, something that we talked about in the foundation in the forming of NA. You know, I think there's a spine of consciousness that runs through the black community. I tell people I liken it to the spine of consciousness that runs through the Jewish community. You can go to any Jewish community and find differences of opinion about topics of great concern to people of Jewish heritage, but they all agree on the need for the survival of the Jewish state. That is that spine for them. That's an issue that I think all people of Jewish heritage support. And I think in many ways, there's something that keeps black folks voting on Democratic currently, as it kept us voting Republican for the first 50 years or so after our emancipation. And we didn't change in 1932 when the black vote began to shift from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. That spine of consciousness on our part was uninterrupted. What happened is that parties changed. And so there is in the black press, and I think you will find among most black journalists, a recognition, either publicly acknowledged or not, that there is a spine of consciousness that has to do with our support of our rights to equal opportunity within this country, and our rights to the claim of fairness and justice as we demand it, and our assertion that the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment of the Constitution ought to be treated as a Bible of sort for black folks. So when it comes to those issues about our rights and citizenship, our rights to vote, you know, our rights to own property, our rights to be treated fairly in courts and in law, I don't think there's a great disagreement among black folks. And I think that's the spine of consciousness that keeps us voting in 90th percentile for Democrats today, as we voted in that same percentage for Republicans from 1868, the first presidential election we took part in, up until 1932.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I'm a professor of journalism at Howard University, co-founder of FierceForBlackWomen.com, and I started in this business about 4 decades ago.
You don't look it.
Thank you. Started when I was 5.
Okay.
Eugene Meyer.
Hi. I think I've been in journalism about as long as Roger Witherspoon, and I'm not doing a very good job at retiring. I have a book that came out almost 5 years ago, Fight for Freedom, the African American Soldiers in John Brown's Army, and I'm pleased that there are still enough people interested that I'm getting speaking requests even now, years later. I just self-published a book called Hidden Maryland in Search of an American Miniature. I blog on many of these issues and other issues on my website, eugeneelmeyer.com. And the values that Dwayne was mentioning, I totally share and endorse, and everybody should. And I think we have we have a common fight and a common struggle, and glad to be here. I will say, curious how many people actually at American University, and not a lot of people on Zoom tonight, and I presume that's the reason. And also, it'd be good to know who they are when they speak.
Well, we're going to have people in the room identify themselves also. Virgil Smith. Thank you, Jane.
Good evening, everyone. Virgil Smith, retired executive publisher from Gannett, and also oversaw talent management for about almost 10 years. Currently working as executive in residence for the Maynard Institute, focused on developing journalists who want to become leaders of newsrooms or print or broadcast or digital. And currently just finished my first book. It's tips for effective leaders to help anyone become a more effective leader, not only in newsrooms, but in media organizations. So Richard, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Virgil. Kenneth Walker. Ken Walker.
Yes, thank you, Richard. I was born and raised in Washington, spent most of my career there. Started off with the Washington Star newspaper, then from there to ABC News. Followed by a stint as the Africa Bureau Chief for National Public Radio, where I spent 20 years, based in Johannesburg. Not with NPR, but living in Africa. Best years of my life. I'm semi-retired, mostly, but I am working on my memoir.
Thank you, Ken. Zama. I see a name, but not a face.
Yes. I'm the Minister of Communications and Tech for the government of the UNIA, ACL, RC 2020. Former editor of Garvey's Voice magazine. I've been in the, I produced over the years, over the last 4 years, quite a number of publications, news, calendars, all kinds of things, yes.
Thank you. Fred Carroll.
Hey, I'm Fred Carroll. I teach at Kennesaw State outside of Atlanta. And thank you, Richard, for inviting me to attend tonight. I enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you. Everhart. I don't see a face, but I see the name.
Hi, I'm Karen Neverhart. I'm the managing editor of Current, which is a trade publication about public broadcasting. We're part of American University's School of Communication. And I also recruit interns. We have a student internship program for SOC journalism students. I've been at Current for like more than 30 years. And right now we're working on some special coverage and commentaries about funding of public media and the future of local journalism.
Thank you. Lydia Lopiccolo. You see the name, but not the face. Okay, we'll come back to you. All right, people in the room. Let's start in the back here. You, sir? Yep.
I wonder if you need a microphone.
I can always talk louder if you want. I got a pretty loud voice.
Hi, everybody on Zoom. I'm Brian Gordon. I'm a political communications student here at American University. I'm actually a recently medically retired veteran from the United States Army, where I spent the last 6 years in the infantry. It was a great time. But before that, I was in Portland State University. I consider myself an Oregonian, though I haven't been there in quite some time, except for maybe a visit. Other than that, there's not much else.
Roger Glass. Started my career at the Hilltop at Howard University, proud to say. Worked for the Black Press, the Washington Afro-American, as well as the Washington Star at one time, and was a labor writer and editor for many years.
I'm Baba Mosi Matsimula, President of the Woodson Banneker Jackson Bay Division of the UNIA ACL Rehabilitating Committee here in Washington, D.C. And our division, we produce a forum twice monthly on Facebook and Zoom. And of course, our job is to try and raise the consciousness of African people everywhere. And I do agree with the brother who mentioned something about backbone and consciousness. And this is what we are all about, because it's absolutely necessary if we're going to get out of the malaise of self-hate, then we're going to have some backbone and some consciousness. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ava Jane Morlock. I am currently a sophomore student in AU's combined MA-BA program. I'm here listening in on a class. It's been fantastic to hear all of your perspectives.
I'm Athalia Knight. I was a reporter for the Washington Post for about 33 years, and after leaving there, I've taught at Georgetown journalism for about 10 years, and now I'm sort of enjoying life and just enjoying not working.
But she's the best aunt and godmother in the world. So, I'm Michelle Martin. I'm the weekend host of All Things Considered. I also contribute to the Amanpour and Company program on PBS. And before that, I worked at the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and ABC News.
Okay, Jesse.
Hi. My name is Jesse Lewis, born and raised in D.C., a graduate of AU, by the way. I used to work for the Washington Post, where I covered what we used to call civil rights, the Vietnam War, the Middle East War in '67, and then I was Middle East correspondent based in Beirut for 3 years, but covered the swath between the Arabian Gulf and the Atlantic, of course, North Africa. I've been in the U.S. Foreign Service, and I also wrote a book about naval power in the Mediterranean.
All right. Jeffrey, you want to tell me who you are? You want to say who you
Well, thank you for that. First of all, I'm Jeffrey James Madison. Very glad for you all to be here. In addition to being the Director of Technology and Media Services for American University's School of Communication, I'm also the CEO and co-founder of The Climate Inc. We're a minority and woman-owned media platform and multi-platform and media and technology company. Our current product, the flagship product, is called The Climate Daily. We specialize in stories, solutions-oriented stories of strength, hope, and courage in the era of climate change. And we focus primarily on marginalized communities who are bootstrapping and taking their own steps to prevent the worst effects of climate change in their own communities. We've now just finished our 530th daily podcast, and we've done 2,000 stories featuring over 2,000 folks doing that worldwide. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay. Now, how about the other folks from AU? No, you don't want to say anything? All right. No. That's right. We want to hear.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Shaka Satori. I am a LA-based community activist for over 30 years. I now do my activism through film, and my most recent thing was a 7-minute mini documentary on Marcus Garvey. Oh. Yeah, and that's
Boil it all down to 7 minutes.
Yeah, but it's pretty, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, do any of our speakers have any last words? No? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody on Zoom and on Facebook. This is our first time doing this as a hybrid at AU, and so I think it was successful.
there'll be a printout of the chat room for those who are here. There are refreshments, and there's another room we can go in to mingle and chat if people want to do that. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.